Okie doke. Hello, everybody. I'm back for more on the state of the economy. I want to start with a little, by the way, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Masao Suzuki. I teach economics at a community college. My classes begin in 1 week. I'm sorry, my semester begins in 1 week. So I have a little bit of the pre-semester jitters. But because I teach economics, it's a perfect motivation for me to also get prepared for these talks. So today I actually have begin two things at least to talk about. The first one is President Trump's press conference over the weekend and his executive orders. And just as a little backdrop to that, I want to go back to March when the Congress passed and President Trump signed the CARES Act. And two of the important parts of the CARES Act, and they're not the whole by any means, but two important parts for now. One was an extra $600 a week in unemployment benefits that have really been a lifeline, especially for a lot of lower income workers. And so one advantage of the $600 a month is it applies to everyone, but it proportionally helps out the lowest income, lowest paid part-time temporary workers the most. So it actually helps equalize the economic situation in the country. And so that expired on July 31st. And then a second part of the CARES Act is it placed an eviction ban on rental units where the landlord has a federally backed mortgage. And it also allowed all federal backed mortgages for residential units for the owners to get forbearance or delay their payments on the mortgage, and that way prevent foreclosures. And that also expired at the end of July. Now, the Democrats in Congress did pass their own act. They like to give it catchy acronyms, so it's called the HEROES Act, although I don't know, I don't remember exactly what they stand for. But anyway, the Democrats passed the HEROES Act back in May, over 2 months ago. But the Republicans basically did nothing from then until about a couple of weeks ago, except to criticize the Democrats' proposal. And so one of the reasons is they had unreasonable hope that the economy would bounce back by this time, and obviously that has not happened. Partly they don't like spending money on the poor and the unemployed. They're all for tax cuts for the rich, but they really object to helping out the poor and the jobless. And the third one is they actually have big disagreements among themselves. And so while the Democrats were able to unite, it wasn't 100% agreement, but they were able to pass a bill in the Congress. The Republicans actually never even passed the bill in the Senate, which they control, because they don't actually have the votes to pass a bill. And so what they did is they had an outline or proposal that they tried to negotiate with the Democrats. That was about less than a third of the size of the Democratic package, and it left out major things like helping to aid budget-strapped state and local governments. And as the clock ticked down, the Democrats actually made a compromise offer to sort of split the difference. And the Republicans just refused that, coming up with different reasons, rationales why that's not good enough. So they basically tried to hold the line, and the both of those parts of the CARES Act have now expired. And what this does, and we'll be seeing this soon, is it really ups the danger of evictions in the immediate future, partly because a lot of people were able to pay their rent with the extra $600, and benefits, and now they aren't, and partly because others who had problems for whatever reason paying the rent or paying the mortgage, now they can be evicted. And so in many parts of the country, there's already thousands of eviction cases that landlords have lined up to try and file in court. And estimates are that there could be as many 40 million households that are in danger of eviction or foreclosure in the current crisis. So what did Trump do? Instead of trying to really use whatever clout he has among the Republican senators and working to get an actual compromise, he stepped in and signed 4 executive orders on the economy on Saturday. And so the first one I want to address is that he signed part of the order. There were 4 parts. One part said that, we're going to have an extra $400 to the people's unemployment insurance benefits. And even though this is a $200 a week cut, which is quite substantial, it's about $800 a month, President Trump labeled his offer quite generous. And so we should be clear, that's his definition of generous. It's for jobless workers to get $800 a month. But it's unclear how, if people will actually see the money because of a couple factors. One is that Trump doesn't have the power to raise taxes or change, or has only limited power over spending. And so what he did is he proposed taking the money from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, to fund the extra unemployment benefits. And the FEMA, the amount of money he wants to take to FEMA is only good for 5 weeks of this $400 a week. And of course, he's taking a big chunk of money away from FEMA right when the hurricane season is getting underway. And of course, many of you know of, and some of you felt Isaiah, if you're on the East Coast just recently, and we're still, my understanding, because I don't actually know, but my understanding is that hurricane season is just getting underway. And so to take money away from a disaster agency right when you're in, seasonal disaster time doesn't really make sense. Another problem, which may be a bigger one, is that Trump's order said that states need to chip in 25% of the total, or they need to chip in $100 a week. And the problem with that is when you multiply that by 30 million people who are out of work, and the fact that state governments are projected budget deficits running to hundreds of billions of dollars in the next 2 years because of the recession. States are required to balance their budget, so they can't borrow money to spend more on unemployment. And so they would have to cut some other type of spending in order to do that. And state and local governments have already cut over 1 million jobs since the recession started in February. And so this could literally lead to a situation where a state might decide to cut spending and cut jobs in order to fund unemployment insurance, which doesn't really make any sense at all. It's also because it's a new order, states would have to set up an additional supplementary system in order to do that. And many states have had big problems with just processing the unemployment that exists. Florida, my state of California, are among the most notorious for not being able to process people's claims. And even when they process them, then not getting them the money that they deserve. And so to ask them to do, set up another system would take at least through September, and it probably mean, there's a good chance there'll be problems and it might not work in a lot of places. And the last thing, which is sort of, to me, arbitrary, but just shows a disdain, is the Trump executive order limits the extra benefit for those workers who are getting less than $100 a week in unemployment insurance benefits. And so this would mean they're either very low wage, or they're part-time workers, or they're in the states that have the stingiest unemployment insurance benefits, because the benefit levels are set state by state, and so they vary quite a bit. And so this is sort of penalizing the poorest of the unemployed, and there's no rationale for that other than just, in my view, being vindictive. Now, this is a pretty negative assessment of his executive order, but I think if you read the news, a lot of mainstream newspapers will have similar assessment. Now, I must say that Trump, maybe he has some smarts. He did his press conference at his own private golf club, Bedminster Golf Club in New Jersey, whose members pay up to $300,000 for a membership. So this is literally the country club crowd. And it was a crowd. They crowded into the conference room where Trump gave his press conference. And when someone reminded them that they're supposed to wear masks inside, which they weren't, and there's photos of it, they hissed and booed. And why should they worry about it? Because one of the things that Trump said in his press conference is that the virus was disappearing. And as all hopefully you know, unfortunately, the COVID-19 is not disappearing in the United States. We've topped 5 million cases, more than 160,000 Americans have died. And one of the most troubling things that's come up is just in the last 2 weeks, there's been a 40% increase in the number of children who have been infected with the COVID-19. So it's now up to, just in the last 2 weeks, over 100,000, almost 100,000 young people, children, not young people, but children, minors, have been found to be infected. And part of this, I think, is probably expanded testing because people are planning to go back to school, but part of it is because people are going back to school. And again, in the news, you can make this, you can see there's outbreaks happening. And in fact, one economist actually labeled Trump's executive orders as the hydroxychloroquine of economic policy, which is, of course, the anti-malarial drug that Trump was promoting as helping to fight the COVID-19, when in fact it doesn't help at all. And so unfortunately, his executive orders may have some of the same effect. A second part of the executive order tried to address the issue with evictions, but instead of extending the eviction ban, it just orders the federal agencies to review all the possible ways to keep people from getting evicted and foreclosed. So it doesn't actually order any action that may help tenants and people trying to buy their home. And so again, this is something where it's called an eviction ban, but it may have little or no effect. And again, with 40 million households at risk, this is more of a charade. One of the things that Trump has long proposed is, and he ordered, is that he wants a payroll tax cut. And he, what he did, because he doesn't have authority to cut taxes, is he deferred or delayed collection of the taxes until December. And he promised that if he's reelected, then he'll get a tax cut passed, and then it'll be a real, tax cut. The problem, of course, is this payroll tax cut. It doesn't even have support in the Republican Senate. It wasn't part of the proposal that there was trying to be negotiated with the Democrats. The Democrats have even less support for it, and many people are concerned because the Social Security and Medicare payroll tax, which if you're working, you can see them on your paycheck, they come to about 7.65% of your gross or total pay. They're used to fund Social Security and Medicare. So many people are concerned that cutting the taxes that go to Social Security and Medicare will open the door wider to call for cuts in Social Security and Medicare. And of course, it's also true that this doesn't really address the problems of jobless workers, because if you're out of work, you're not paying any Social Security or Medicare taxes. The last part, and I guess there is something good about his executive orders, is Trump did extend the forbearance or deferral of payments on federal student loans and also the interest. And so this would help about 35 million young people, including my daughter, who have college loans, but it doesn't help the 8 million people who have private college loans. But nevertheless, this one part of the action was positive. It was helpful to people. And I just want to mention that people with college loans, younger people with college loans in particular, have been the so-called millennials. They're some of the hardest hit people by the current crisis, and also got hit hard by the 2007-2009 recession. So this can actually be quite good. I was going to move on, but I do think there's a question that is relevant to this section on the executive order. And the question was, do you think signing the executive order hurt or helped his chances in November? Well, it's hard to tell what's going to happen in November. And certainly my record on predicting Trump's elections, if you were, well, I wasn't interviewed. You can't find any videos of me back in August of 2016, but you can be sure I was agreeing with almost everybody else that Hillary Clinton was going to win. So it's not here yet, but I do think that his hope, I do think at this moment, it's probably helping him out more than it's hurting, because I think there's bound to be not just people who will believe anything he says, and there's a good crowd of people like that, but there's others who just hear about extending the eviction ban, or hear about extending the unemployment benefits, even if it's at $400, and I think they'll feel more hopeful, and they'll have a more positive view of President Trump. So I think short term, it probably will help him. It'd be interesting to see what polls say in a week or two. But I think longer term, it's not going to help him, because these actions, in fact, won't really help people. And in fact, one of the downsides to them is they can sort of drag out attempts to actually negotiate a compromise, because I think many on the Republican Senate side may think that, let's see how this Trump stuff works, and before we actually start to negotiate. So I do think that it could end up hurting them in November. If people have other questions about this, I'll take them more at the end, so you can hang in there, or just write them into the Google chat, and I'll take them up at the end. I want to turn now to sort of more the state of the economy. On Friday, we had the monthly jobs report came out for the month of July. The report said that about 1.8 million jobs were created in July. And normally this would be like, wow, because in a normal economic expansion, you might have 2 or 3 or 400,000 jobs being created. But in fact, because we lost close to 20 million jobs back in March and April, and that the increase was a lot larger in June as compared to July. In June, 4.8 million jobs were recreated, and this slowed to 1.8 million in July. So there's a big drop in the pace of hiring. And this might even be sort of an overestimate of where things are going right now, because the monthly jobs report is it's done with a survey during the week that contains the 12th of the month. So it really doesn't capture the last half of July, which is when all of, not all of, but much of the bad news about the pandemic came out. And so even with all of the jobs created in May and June and July, we're still down about 13 million jobs from February when the recession began. We still have the latest unemployment figures that include all the different programs, the regular state unemployment insurance, the federal pandemic unemployment assistance program, which is for gig workers, self-employed, and then the federal emergency unemployment compensation, which is for those who were collecting unemployment insurance benefits and then their regular state insurance ran out, because typically they last about 6 months. And so, of course, if you were, if you lost your job in January and then, the pandemic hit in March and you hadn't found a job, then your odds of finding a new job are quite slim, because most of the jobs created in May and June and July were actually calling people back to work from businesses that had closed down, and not actually creating that many new jobs. And in fact, one of the worrisome signs is of all the people who've been called back to work, over a third of them have been laid off again, and then another quarter of them are concerned that they will be laid off in the near future. And so one of the things we saw is a big jump in the number of longer-term unemployed people who've been out of work between 3 and 6 months. And this is a sign that there is sort of an accumulation of buildup of people losing jobs and not being able to get it back. I mentioned there's signs that the economy is slowing at the end of July. The Census Bureau started and unfortunately ended, but their last survey at the end of July, they have something called a household pulse survey, and they showed that the number of households who had lost income and the number that were expecting to lose income both were increasing through the month of July, showing a lot of economic damage and economic uncertainty and insecurity going on there. All right. I just want to end up by saying we do have 30 million people that are collecting unemployment insurance benefits, and the official unemployment rate did drop again to 10.2%. So that's better than 11, and that's better than 13, and that's better than 17. But in fact, it's actually still the worst unemployment rate since the Great Depression. So it's sort of things were so bad in March and April that they look relatively better, even though they're really bad now. And I should note that this unemployment rate does really understate the number of people who are actually out of work. I prefer to look at the number of people collecting unemployment insurance benefits, which now is close to 31 million people, which is about 20% of the labor force. And I think this is the best indication of the actual damage, economic pain that's being inflicted on the US workforce. Okay, I think I'll wrap up in terms of the state of the economy. So let's see, we have a new question. What would be the ideal thing for Congress to do to reverse unemployment? Well, this is getting a little bit beyond my area of expertise, although of course I have opinions about it. And one of the things that's sort of interesting to me is there's actually a lot of agreement among economists who tend to be a fairly conservative group, but there's actually a lot of agreement among economists that we need to really crush the COVID-19 pandemic in order for the economy to recover. And this goes up as far as former president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. We have 12 Federal Reserve banks, and they, along with the national Fed, make up the highest sort of banking and interest rate setting power in the country. But anyway, he called for a national 6-week lockdown, more severe and longer than what we did back in March and April, in order to really crush the virus. And I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't know if 6 weeks, I'm sure if it were carried out, 6 weeks would crush the virus. I don't know if less time would be needed, but one of the problems right now is that even though testing is up, it can't keep track with the number of infections. And so in different places, tests are taking days or even weeks. And at that point, it's basically useless, because if you get 10 days after you take a test, you say, oh yeah, you're positive and you're not sick, and you probably aren't spreading it by then anyway, but it's like, it's not really that much use, right? And then to try and figure out, like 2 weeks ago, who might I gotten it from? It's really hard. So there's just too many cases to do the testing, to do the contact tracing, and to be able to try and isolate, fight the virus on an individual level. So we probably do need more restrictions, and that really is the basis to try and get the economy recovered. Because one of the things I think economists are aware of is that a lot of the economic damage was already happening even before the lockdown. So I know my wife and I went to our favorite Chinese restaurant. This was actually just less than a week before there was a lockdown in our county. And I wasn't worried that much about the infection, because I figured, well, the attendance has been dropping at this restaurant, because we go there a lot. And so I felt, there won't probably be that many people, even though it was Saturday night. And so we walk in, and this is a medium-sized or largish Chinese restaurant. It has official seating of about 175 people. And my wife and I were the only customers in the entire restaurant on a Saturday night. And this is before the lockdown. So a lot of restaurants, entertainment, airlines were all showing signs of a big drop off in sales before the lockdowns. And that's part of the problem now, even though as more states reopened back in May and June and July, and the economy did recover, but the pandemic also recovered. And so I think that's really something that needs to be done. And then the thing is, if you have that kind of lockdown, what you need to do is you need to have relief for unemployed workers. You need to have relief for small businesses that have to close. And one of the things that's actually a bit, even though I slip up sometimes, but it's a bit misleading to use the word stimulus, because we're not actually trying to get the economy to grow. We're trying to get people to survive while we suppress the virus. But the virus suppression really has to come. And I personally, and again, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm very worried about what's happening with different schools across the country trying to reopen. Many of you may have seen that photo from a high school in Georgia with crowds of young students, almost no one wearing a mask. And unfortunately, and I think this is not uncommon, especially among powers that be, is a student who evidently took the photo and then spread it was suspended from school. And that's really bad news when it's sort of a shoot the messenger policy. And not surprisingly, within days, there were a number of positive cases, and they ended up having to shut down the high school. And to me, I am an educator myself, and I understand that online education is not a substitute for in-class education. And it's one of the things I look forward to the most, is actually meeting and interacting with students, which is just not the same when you're all doing it by video. But I'm worried that we're going to have even more outbreaks, especially with the recent news about how many more children are actually being identified with the virus. So I guess a combination of two things. One is to really make an effort to suppress the virus. And this is not to say there shouldn't be work on a vaccine, but a vaccine hopefully will come towards the end of this year. But then there's a whole production side, because we're going to need hundreds of millions just for this country alone. And they're talking about initial first runs of tens of millions. And that's not going to be enough to solve the problem. And then having the aid available to people to survive a kind of lockdown. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't done right the first time. And now there's already a lot of economic damage that's accumulated, where we've seen companies going bankrupt, closing down, permanently laying off people. And as more and more people have permanent layoffs, then that kind of damage is not going to, those kind of jobs are not going to just come back when and if the pandemic is suppressed. So, but the longer we wait on that, the more the economic damage accumulates, and the worse the economic situation is going to end up. All right, that's the second question. I think that might be all. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Sorry, I guess I shouldn't hum on the, yeah. I think I covered everything. So unless there's any other questions coming in, I'm going to do that. All right, sorry. Probably not the best. I don't have everything at the tip of my tongue or the height of my on my brain. So anyway, this is Masao Suzuki trying to wrap up. I just want to add that I am a member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. If you like this talk, I have other talks, earlier talks on the economy. I write articles regularly for Fight Back News, and you can look up go to fightdecknews.org and you can search for me. And then last, if you're interested in the FRSO, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, you can go to the FRSO website at www.frso.org/join, and you can join in an exciting and dynamic and young group of revolutionaries. All right, thank you so much for listening to this, and I'll see you soon. Bye.